Clara stood at the edge of her parched land, the brittle stalks of last season's withered crops crunching beneath her worn boots. The sun, a merciless glare above, cast long shadows over the barren fields she fought so hard to hold on to. Hunger gnawed like a relentless wolf inside her small cabin, where only stale bread and a handful of supplies remained. With a prayer swallowed by the dry wind, she clutched a sack of what little goods she could barter, fragile hope wrapped in cloth, and stepped toward the unforgiving border of Apache territory. The earth was cracked and thirsty, a vast canvas of ochre and dust stretching to the horizon. Every gust of wind carried whispers of danger, of those who roamed past the warnings etched into the cracked bark of lone mesquite trees. This was a land of suspicion and silent threats, where the line between life and death was drawn as sharply as the ridge that marked the edge of Apache lands. Clara's heart beat a steady drum of dread and resolve, her fingers trembling as they tightened around her meager offerings. Her breath tasted dry and heavy, mingling with the thunder of her pounding pulse. She was a woman worn by loss, hardened by solitude, yet still burning with a flicker of fierce determination. Every step toward the trading post was a wager against fear, each movement weighted by the knowledge that a misstep could mean ruin or worse. The narrow path wound between jagged rocks and whispering bushes, bearing witness to countless silent negotiations and fragile truces. Today, Clara would place her trust against the odds. At the trading post's edge, she exchanged her humble provisions for sacks of grain, a lifeline of sustenance against the encroaching desperation. Her eyes scanned the horizon, alert for shadows that might break the fragile peace. And then, across the golden plain, a sudden figure emerged from the haze, the feared Apache rider. Cloaked in twilight, his silhouette was a stark slash against the fading light. Known for his fierce reputation, his presence stiffened the air with a palpable tension that pressed against Clara's chest. Time slowed as the rider drew nearer, the rhythmic pounding of hooves, a steady drumbeat of dread and curiosity. Clara's breath hitched. Memories of whispered tales and warnings flooded her mind. Yet beneath the fear, a stubborn glimmer of hope stirred. Could this be a harbinger of doom, or a chance for something unforeseen? As the rider came within earshot, he reined his mount steadily, the sunlight catching on the silver glint of an object in his hand. Instead of anger or aggression, the warrior extended toward Clara a plain band of metal, a wedding ring. The quiet offer hung in the air, like a fragile bridge between two worlds, a symbol heavy with meaning that defied the harshness surrounding them. Clara's eyes widened, her fingers instinctively clutching the edge of her cloak as the weight of the gesture settled deep inside her. Fear wrestled with a flicker of trust. She stood frozen, suspended between suspicion and the flickering promise this unexpected gift implied. In that charged silence, a fragile hope flickered against the unforgiving wind. Suddenly, movement stirred further behind her. Shadows of colonists gathering beyond the trees, their gazes sharp and wary, eyes filled with doubt and impending threat. The thin line of safety Clara glimpsed trembled like a mirage under the mounting weight of suspicion and danger. Her gaze locked with the Apache's, two worlds converging in a moment, heavy with possibility and peril. Before the night could swallow them whole, Clara's heart beat a new rhythm, a dawn of unknown paths where hope and fear intertwined on the edge of the frontier. Many fellow travelers who follow these forgotten tales across the rugged lands have told us that fate, or perhaps the treacherous algorithm of YouTube, sometimes silently erases their subscriptions before the next perilous turn, and a new twist reveal themselves. Glance down below this video quickly and ensure you're still counted among our band. We don't want you to miss a single voice echoing through this valley. Check your subscription now and stand with us in this enduring saga. Clara fingered the cold metal of the ring beneath her blouse, pressing it close to her heart as she returned to the shadows of her cabin. She dared not speak of it aloud. Who would believe the feared Apache warrior? Nantan had chosen her? The weight of his unexpected gift settled heavy on her chest, a delicate balance of hope and peril. The days that followed were marked by a quiet tension, a fragile thread woven through each wary glance exchanged between them. Nantan did not demand blind trust. Instead, he spoke of a promise, protection woven not from words, but actions. "This ring," he said one evening, beneath the pale stars, "is a vow, not only between us, but between our peoples, if you choose to see it so." Clara nodded, the firelight flickering in her eyes. "But trust is a hard commodity here, Nantan. Between the colonists and the Apache, there is too much blood spilled, too many broken promises." He regarded her with a somber gaze. "I know the stories, Clara. I carry the history of the scars upon this land. But this, what we start here, could be a new path, one not dictated by fear." Their days fell into a fragile rhythm. Clara tended to her withering crops, while Nantan watched the horizon, scanning for signs of danger, not only from wary men of the settlement, but from his own tribe, who may see his offer as betrayal. Each morning, Clara felt the eyes of neighbors burn into her back when she stepped beyond the boundaries of her farm, whispers trailing her like shadows. Word traveled faster than wind through the tall, dry grass. At gatherings, the settlers' voices rose, low and sharp, pricking the night with accusations. There were rumors. A Colono had seen Clara speaking with the Apache. Another swore they had seen Nantan near her fence late at night. In an unspoken agreement, suspicion grew like a poisonous vine, strangling the heart of the small community. Clara could feel the frost creeping into cold stares during town meetings. The heavy thud of her name joined with Nantan's in murmured condemnation. She heard the quiet mutterings over mended fences and cracked hearths, saw the clenched jaws of men who once greeted her with nods, now turned away in silence. Yet, in the quiet of her cabin, the ring was a pulse, steady, defiant. One evening, as the sun dipped below the distant hills, Clara met Nantan along the edge of the farm. Her eyes searched his face for reassurance, though neither would admit the fear that threatened to undo the fragile trust they'd built. "You carry a heavy burden," she whispered, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. Nantan's jaw tightened, his voice low but steady. "As do you. I am caught between two worlds, Clara. Some see me as a savior, others, traitor. The peace I offer is not readily accepted. Clara swallowed hard, knowing the truth in his words. And the colonists, they will come for you. For us, such a union shakes their foundation. He nodded, eyes darkening with resolve. It is a test, not only for us, but for all who believe that fear must no longer dictate the future here. The night deepened, a cold wind stirring the dry leaves around their feet. Clara felt the weight of isolation press down on them both, two souls bound by a promise amid a storm of suspicion. Days stretched into uneasy weeks. Nantan remained a quiet sentinel, guarding Clara's land more fiercely than any weapon. But the walls of hostility closed in, rumors sharpening into warnings. Whispered threats crept through the night like coyotes stalking prey. At a colonists' meeting, the murmurs swelled into vocal opposition. Arguments flared, voices violent and unforgiving. "She consorts with the enemy," one man spat. "If we allow this alliance, our security will crumble." Eyes turned toward the fragile farm, like predator and prey, locked in grim acknowledgement. Clara heard the accusation, but said nothing. Her hands trembled, not from fear alone, but from the burden of standing at the crossroads of histories written in blood and hope. Nantan stood beside her in silence, his presence a shield and a challenge to the order that sought to unmake them. "So there is no turning back," Clara finally breathed, her voice barely above a whisper as they faced the gathering dusk. "This ring is no longer just a promise between you and me. It has become a spark, a threat to those clinging to the old ways." Nantan's gaze held hers steady. "Then we must be ready for what comes. For peace requires courage, and sometimes sacrifice." The land around them was vast and empty, but the stories and fears of its people crowded closer each day. Clara could feel the eyes of her neighbors, the tightening circle of suspicion, the stirring unrest waiting just beyond the trees. And yet, in her heart, the ring glimmered, small, stubborn light defying the gathering darkness. Rumors of their bond unfurled rapidly, stirring unrest among the settlers, igniting whispers of betrayal and fear. Clara's lonely farm now bristled with watchful eyes, turned suspicious and hostile. The fragile hope held in her hand trembled beneath the weight of mounting threats. At the next colony meeting, tense and crowded, the name Clara and Nantan rose like a powder keg ready to explode. Those gathered murmured of alliance and treachery, challenging the future Clara dared to grasp. The whispered threats weren't distant anymore. They had become a looming storm on the horizon, a test not just of their fragile bond, but of the hope it symbolized. As night claimed the land, Clara stood at her window, the ring warm against her palm. Across the barren field, distant shadows gathered, faces hardened by fear and suspicion. The fragile promise, held tight between her and the Apache rider, was now poised against the gathering storm of distrust and hostility. An unseen battle for the soul of a land, desperate for change. Samuel's shadow stretched long and dark across the uneven dirt road as he stepped into the dim gathering space outside the saloon. His gaze burned with a harsh intensity that seemed to draw the wary glances of men already uneasy with his presence. The firelight flickered on his weathered face, carved deep by years of hard choices and harsher compromises. Samuel's reputation had grown as swiftly as the parched grass that clung desperately to life in the dry earth, an iron-fisted colono determined to hold power, no matter the cost. Whispers rose as he moved with deliberate purpose, his voice low, yet carrying a weight that silenced the murmurs. "This talk of alliances with the Apaches," he began, eyes narrowing, "it ain't just foolish. It's a dagger pointed at the heart of our community." Around him, faces hardened, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. Samuel's words cut through the thick air, kindling a fire fueled by fear and old wounds. "I won't stand for it. Not while I hold breath and have men willing to listen." In the tense stillness, a grizzled man stepped forward, voice rough as gravel. "Clara's no traitor, but this union, it challenges what we know. It threatens what keeps us safe. If that rider walks these lands with her, it changes everything." Samuel's gaze flicked skyward, as if scouring the stars for some celestial endorsement. "Then it's settled. We'll gather. We'll show them there's no place here for betrayal disguised as hope." Back on her farm, Clara moved through the fading light with a heavy heart. The ring nestled close beneath her blouse, its cold metal a constant reminder of the price she may be called to pay. The fields lay in quiet surrender, dust rising in lazy spirals with each whispered breeze. Her hands, calloused and steady despite the growing storm, tended to the earth with a stubborn faith. Her children's laughter, once a balm, now haunted her with a fragile sound amid rustling shadows. The encroaching hostility from neighbors, growing louder each day, pressed upon it like a tightening noose. That evening, as twilight draped its smoky veil over the land, Clara met Nantan at the edge of their shared realm, the boundary where two worlds tentatively touched. His eyes, dark pools reflecting both courage and caution, searched hers with weighed hope. "We stand at a crossroads," Clara said softly, her voice barely a whisper beneath the breath of the wind. "The settlers' grievances grow like wildfire, Samuel's stirring the others toward a reckoning none of us can predict." Nantan's jaw clenched, lips a rough line against the gathering dusk. "I see the danger, but backing down will only feed their fury. This ring, this bond, it is more than a symbol. It is a shield and a flame. We must show strength, not submission." A silence fell between them, broken only by distant voices murmuring through the thorny brush beyond the fences. The weight of expectation hung thick in the air, threatening to crush the fragile trust they had forged. Inside the cabin, Clara's eyes traced the familiar shapes of worn shelves and faded photographs, gripping the ring until her knuckles whitened. Memories of loss intertwined with the fledgling promise Nantan's gift represented. Could courage blossom amid such deep-rooted fear? Could a fragile flower withstand a storm that approached with footsteps heavy and unrelenting? The restless quiet was shattered by the urgent barking of dogs and the faint murmur of distant calls. Clara's breath caught. Heart hammering like the hooves on the plains as heavy boots approached the farmstead. Shadows flickered between moonlight and firelight, faint but unmistakable. The gathering of men, summoned by Samuel's call. Their eyes gleamed with suspicion and cold resolve. "We're marked now," Clara whispered, turning toward Nantan. "There's no hiding what we've become." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers closing around hers with fierce tenderness. "Then we face it. Together. Every stone thrown, every breath of doubt. Together." The night deepened, enclosing the farm in a cloak of fragile defiance. Beyond the fences, a ring of flickering flames bloomed, a silent siege announced by the rising sparks of patrol fires. The murmurs turned to chants, the tension coiled tight as a rattlesnake ready to strike. Clara stood at the porch, eyes straining against the dark, the ring a pulse of warmth beneath her palm, the stubborn ember of a hope that could burn through the coldest night. The quiet before the storm hushed the land. Somewhere beyond the tree line, the first crackle of fire caught the wind, and with it, the promise of confrontation. In that moment, the fragile lines between friend, foe, love, and hatred blurred into shadows cast by firelight. The farm was surrounded, and the enemy would strike before the dawn. The morning light crept softly over the uneven land, casting long shadows across the brittle stalks that still clung stubbornly to the cracked soil. Clara moved quietly outside her worn cabin, the weight of the wedding band pressing gently against her chest beneath the folds of her blouse. Nantan stood beside her, silent but vigilant, his sharp eyes sweeping the horizon with an alertness born from years of hardship and watchful survival. Despite the fragile calm between them, the air was thick with tension. A fragile alliance had been forged here, between a widow clinging to hope and a feared Apache rider, daring to reach across a chasm of history and pain. Yet neither of them was naive to the perils lurking both beyond their land and within the shadows of Nantan's own tribe. The wind carried whispers through the dry grass, faint but unmistakable, a message older than any settlement, warning of unrest. Nantan's gaze darkened at the sound of the distant hoofbeats, steady and deliberate. "They approach," he said quietly. His voice held the calm of a man ready to face storms, but beneath it lurked the flicker of deeper fires. The fires of dissent inside his own people. Clara's fingers tightened around the ring as they turned toward the farmstead. She knew the welcome these men would offer was no hospitality, but a crucible. Word had traveled swiftly among the Apache clans. The promise, symbolized by the ring, was more than a union. It was a provocation. To some, it was a betrayal so raw it threatened the fragile order of their tribe. Others saw it as a beacon of hope, but their voices were often drowned by those screaming for vengeance. Near the edge of their property, a small band of warriors waited, faces painted with the sharpness of resolve and apprehension. Some bore the marks of kinship with Nantan, others the cold suspicion of factions who rejected the idea of peace with colonists, especially one marked by a union with Clara. Clara met Nantan's steady gaze. "It's more than just the settlers," she said softly. "They're not the only ones who see this as a challenge." His jaw clenched, pronouncing the weight of unspoken threats. "My position is fragile. Within the council, there are those who call me a traitor, who prepare to move against me. They believe the old ways must hold. My love for you, that is the spark they fear." Her breath caught, not from fear alone, but from the crushing knowledge that the forces she faced were no longer just external. Their fragile hope rested on a knife's edge. That night, as twilight bled into darkness, the farm became a quiet fortress. Small fires stirred around the perimeter, not all kindled by foes. Among the gathered were colonists, ones who saw in Clara and Nantan's alliance a slim chance at peace, and Apache warriors willing to stand against their own to uphold this fragile bond. Yet even as allies gathered, an undercurrent of distrust hummed beneath their quiet. Movements. Inside the cabin, Clara traced the rough wood grain of the table with trembling hands. The shadows cast by the flickering oil lamp seemed to dance nervously across the walls, echoing the growing unrest between worlds. Nantan stepped in silently, his presence a steadying force. "There are whispers the council will convene soon," he explained, voice low but resolute. "A journey is planned, a gathering to decide my fate. They seek justice, but justice, in their eyes, means ending what we have started." Clara swallowed hard, the room suddenly too small to hold the weight of that truth. "So they bring their judgment to you?" she murmured. "And with it, the end of us?" He nodded slowly. "Judgment or execution. I carry the risk, and so do you." Outside, a night wind rose, stirring dry leaves in a mournful rustle. The distant howls of coyotes seemed to carry the sadness of a land divided. Clara turned to the window, eyes scanning the dark outline of the hills. Her mind raced through possibilities, none of them easy. The small farm, their fragile sanctuary, was poised on the brink of a storm, with no clear passing. "We must prepare," she said. Her voice grew stronger, pillars of resolve rising from the depths of her fear. "If the council comes for you, and Samuel's men strike at the farm, we'll face both hells." Nantan's gaze softened, a flicker of gratitude touching the fierce lines of his face. "We fight for more than ourselves now, for those who believe this land can change." The hours that followed were thick with hurried plans whispered in shadowed corners. Scouts moved silently through the night, sharing news and warnings. The farm became a gathering point for a fragile coalition. Colonists pulled from fear and desperation. Apache warriors risking exile to stand with Nantan. But even as they prepared, Clara uncovered troubling signs. Secret words passed in quiet corners, a conspiracy taking root inside the tribe. Some among the elders wielded old grudges like sharpened knives, desperate for the chance to strike down the rider who dared to dream of peace with a foreigner. That knowledge weighed heavily on her, sharpening every breath into a slice of tension. The firelight flickered against rough faces, some grim with determination, others charged with doubt. And then, just as the cold dawn began to unravel the night's darkness, a stranger arrived, A lone messenger, emerging from the shadows, worn and urgent, bearing a sealed note. Nantan reached to take it, the scroll's weight heavy in his hands. His eyes scanned the hastily written script, a shadow crossing his face. "The council is moving forward," he said, voice grim. "A journey to meet with elders. Their verdict will come soon, and it will decide not only my fate, but the future of this fragile alliance." Clara's heart clenched. The fragile bond, forged in fire and fear, now stood at the edge of a blade, sharper than any enemy's bullet. She met Nantan's eyes, searching for hope in the storm. "There's no turning back," he said quietly. "Only forward, into whatever awaits." The farm lay silent beneath the wide sky, a fragile island in a sea of turmoil. And beyond the distant hills, the council's judgment loomed, a journey that might bring justice or bring an end. The next chapter was already unfolding, written in shadows and whispered threats. The test had only just begun. The dawn crept slowly over the horizon, casting pale light across the battered fields of Clara's farm. Silence pressed deep into the earth, broken only by the distant murmur of a land holding its breath. Clara stood at the edge of her porch, the cold wedding band hidden beneath the folds of her blouse, its weight a steady pulse against her chest. The events of the past days whispered in the shadows behind her, the mounting tensions, the tightening noose woven by suspicion and hatred. Nantan's silhouette appeared beside her, tall and still, his eyes scanning the far edges of their property. The air between them was thick with unspoken fears. He broke the quiet, voice low and heavy with warning. "They have taken my position away. The council stripped me of my duties. The radicals in the tribe have called me a traitor." His words fell like stones, sinking deep into the fragile ground of their alliance. Clara's breath caught. The man who had offered her so much hope was now cast out, made a target by the very people who were meant to stand beside him. "Why?" she asked, voice tight with rising dread. "Because I dared to bridge a divide. Because this ring," he lifted a hand to his chest, "speaks a truth that many refuse to hear. To them, peace with colonists is weakness. I stand accused of betrayal, condemned for love." His gaze locked with hers, fierce and raw. "I am no longer their leader. For now, I am alone." Her hands clenched, resolve hardening like the barren soil underfoot. "Then they'll come for this farm next." Before he could respond, the sharp crackle of movement stirred behind the wooden walls. Clara's heart leapt. Voices, low and rough, rose outside. She stepped into the yard, where figures cloaked in dust and determination emerged beneath the gray morning light. Armed men, no doubt summoned by Samuel's relentless will, had come to exact their fury. Nantan's stance shifted instantly, protective and commanding. "They are here," he said. "Their intent is clear." Clara swallowed the tight knot twisting her stomach, but refused to show weakness. Her hands moved instinctively, reaching for the worn rifle resting against the porch beam. "We'll fight," she said, voice steady despite the chaos stirring within her. The attackers began advancing, their footsteps crunching on dry earth and scattered rocks. Clara stood side by side with Nantan, as the first shouts pierced the silence. Guns were raised, and the air shook with the thunder of shots fired. Not reckless, but deliberate. A message carved in lead. A spray of dirt exploded near Clara's feet. Dust stung her eyes, but she forced herself to aim true, to shoot only when necessity demanded. Beside her, Nantan moved like a shadow, his hands steady, his presence a shield. His fierce grace in battle reminded her why she had dared to hope, why she had accepted the ring despite all the dangers. But victory came at a cost. A sudden cry tore through the chaos. A man bleeding, collapsing against a fence post. Clara's heart hammered as she saw one of their few allies fall, the grim reality of their predicament weighing heavy. The farm, their sanctuary, was under siege by forces that would not relent easily. Between volleys of fire, Clara glanced around. Young Apache warriors stood beside settlers, their faces stoic, yet marked by uncertainty. It was a fragile coalition, bound by a shard of trust that had been forged too quickly in a world too broken. Fear flickered behind every guarded look. The fighting wore on, but the attackers sensed the resolve within the farm's defenders. Murmurs spread among the assailants. This would not be an easy conquest. They pulled back, regrouping beneath the waves of dust that rose from the battered soil. When the firing ceased, a tense silence settled like thunder after a storm. Clara moved quickly to tend the wounded, her hands shaking but sure. Nantan knelt beside her, sweat and dirt smudging his face, the glint of fresh blood across his side telling a story deeper than words. "She's strong," he murmured, eyes softening despite the pain. "Stronger than I feared." Clara looked up, recognition and gratitude mingling in her tired gaze. "We've weathered the first storm, but the war is far from over." They shared a breath, heavy with exhaustion and hope, before distant drums of movement echoed beyond the trees. Shadows shifted, darkened, and grew. Clara's heart froze as riders appeared on the horizon, galloping with grim purpose, their numbers far greater than before. Nantan's face contorted in pain, but his fierce spirit remained unbowed. "I must return," he said, voice strained but resolute. "These wounds, I carry not only pain, but message. The time has come." "With the farm surrounded," Clara whispered, clutching the ring as though it might anchor them both, "we have no choice but to stand." The horses thundered closer, their riders closing the circle, a tightening noose of fury and vengeance. The air tasted of iron and dust, an omen of violence soon to rain down. Clara's gaze met Nantan's one last time before he turned. Each step away, a silent promise and a desperate bid for survival. Her breath hitched, the fragile balance of their dream trembling on the razor's edge. The farm stood silent, but not broken, encircled by shadows and strife, its fate entwined with the man who rode into the gathering storm. And as night fell, the enemy closed in. The siege had begun. Dawn had barely broken when Clara took her place at the helm of the farm. The pale light draped soft shadows over the cracked soil, but it was the fierce determination in her eyes that cast the longest, a silent declaration that she would not yield, no matter the price. The wedding band nestled close beneath her blouse was a secret anchor, a promise stitched deep into her heart amid the howling storm outside. The air was taut with the weight of uncertainty. While Nantan lay recovering from wounds that cut deeper than flesh, Clara's shoulders bore new burdens, those of protector, leader, and symbol. The whispers that once stalked her now sought a face these desperate times could recognize. Hers. She moved with quiet resolve, rallying those who dared to stand with her, weaving a fragile shield against the tightening circle of hostility. Unexpected allies emerged in the shadowed peripheries of the farm. Young Apache warriors stepping beyond the ancient divides, their painted faces etched with both courage and hesitation. They bore no weapons of conquest, but rather hands willing to build and defend. Among them, a young scout named Taya met Clara's gaze. With fierce steadiness, bridging worlds as clearly as the ring that bound their fates. "We believe in what you and Nantan are trying to do," Taya said one evening by the flickering firelight. "The old ways bleed the land dry. This union might just be the seed of something new." Clara's breath caught at the truth beneath the words. The farm was no longer hers alone. It had become a beacon against the dark currents, threatening to drown everything she hoped for. But quiet hope is a fragile thing in a land where fear breeds faster than spring grass. News spread like wildfire, carried on hurried feet and whispered warnings. Some Apache viewed the alliance as betrayal, a wound to hardened pride, deeper than any sword could reach. Within Nantan's own tribe, threats slithered through the shadows, darker than the night itself. Inside the cramped cabin, Clara sat close to the wooden table, fingers tracing the grain as if seeking strength from the earth itself. The low murmur of voices beyond the walls was a reminder that peace was a tentative dream, fragile and fleeting. Suddenly, Nantan entered, his gait unsteady, but his eyes burning with the embers of unyielding spirit. He dropped onto a rough-hewn chair, the fresh blood staining his side like a stark reminder of what had been lost. "They've stripped me of my post," he said, voice low, the weight of exile settling over the room like a shroud. "The council calls me traitor, a man who walks between worlds, but no longer belongs to either." Clara's grip tightened on the ring beneath her blouse. "They fear what they cannot control," she whispered. "That this union, that our hope is a threat to their old order." Nantan nodded, pain etching deeper lines on his face. "They plan a council journey to decide my fate. Justice, they call it. But justice here tastes of death." That night, the farm's perimeter bloomed with scattered fires, flickering warnings held aloft by both settler and Apache alike. Silhouettes moved among the trees, eager sentinels bound by conviction or desperation. Even as allies gathered, unspoken doubts hung like smoke, their tendrils threatening to choke the fragile coalition. The silence was shattered when a lone messenger broke through the gathering gloom, his footsteps muffled against the dusty earth. He carried a sealed note, worn and urgent, its message pressing heavily upon Nantan's shoulders. "The council moves forward," Nantan said, voice grim, unfolding the parchment. "Their verdict will decide not just my fate, but the future of everything we've built here." Clara felt the room tilt as if the walls themselves were closing in. "And if they reject you?" she asked, voice barely steady. "Then it may be the end of the alliance of hope itself," he replied. Outside, the wind stirred the dry grasses as if carrying the whispered prayers of a land suspended between war and peace. Clara and Nantan faced the coming storm, bound by more than a ring, by a promise forged in defiance and tempered with sacrifice. The dawn had barely warmed the earth when the first signs of ambush whispered through the wilderness. Unseen eyes traced Nantan's path, shadowed figures lying in wait for the moment to strike. Radicals from within, fueled by bitter words and ancient grudges, intended to sever what they feared most, the fragile thread of peace that Nantan dared to weave. As Nantan set out on his journey to meet the council, every step was weighed down by the knowledge of the trail hidden in the brush, and the grim certainty that those who opposed him would stop at nothing. Clara watched him vanish into the haze, the heavy silence afterward speaking louder than any battle cry. The farm stood vulnerable, encircled by uncertain allies and relentless enemies alike. The test of their dream had only just begun. And, in the deep shadows beyond the hills, hostile forces waited, ready to strike and tear apart the fragile hope that glimmered like a lone star against the dark. The dawn was pale and uncertain, washing the farmstead in a fragile light that seemed to hesitate on the horizon, as if wary to declare the coming day. Clara stood near the edge of her land, the worn ring still hidden beneath the folds of her blouse, an unyielding weight against her heart. The air around her hummed with tension, not just from the biting chill, but from the heavy truth that had settled across the valley. Nantan's footsteps echoed behind her, slow but deliberate, each one carrying the wariness of a man burdened by more than just the miles. "Traveled. They have taken everything from me," he said quietly, voice thick with the sting of betrayal. "The council has stripped me of my place among the leaders. They call me traitor, a man who walks between worlds but belongs to none." Clara's breath caught sharply, her fingers tightening instinctively on the faint warmth of the ring tucked close to her skin. "Because you dared hope for something new," she whispered. "Because peace terrifies those blinded by old hatred." Nantan's dark eyes met hers, fierce, unbowed. "My love for you is the spark they cannot quench, the promise I made, the future I seek. It shakes the very foundations of their tribe. The radicals within the council conspire to end this before it truly begins." He swayed slightly, the polish of pain bleeding through his steadfast exterior. "I'm a man standing alone now." The shadow of his words sank into the soil beneath them, thick as the dust that stirred in the morning breeze. Clara swallowed the bitter bitterness rising in her throat. "Then the storm is upon us," she said, her voice steady despite the quake inside. "They will come for the farm next. Hunger for revenge will sharpen their blades." Before Nantan could reply, a sudden clatter shattered the fragile quiet. Rough voices rose outside the cabin, low, determined, bitter. Clara's heart pounded as she stepped into the yard, meeting the harsh faces of armed men emerging from the morning shadows. These figures wore the dust of the road and the hard resolve etched in lines deeper than weather-worn bark. The men summoned by Samuel's relentless fury. Nantan moved to her side, protective and resolute, a pillar amid the chaos. "They have come," he said simply, voice calm, yet laced with iron. "Their purpose is clear." Clara's hands trembled only momentarily before she seized the rifle resting against the porch post. "Then we fight," she declared, voice ringing through the chilly air, fierce with unspoken promise and trembling courage. The attackers advanced, stomping dust into the dry earth, voices rising in snarled threats, guns raised, echoing the roar of defiance against the dawn. Clara's pulse matched the cadence of gunfire as dirt erupted near her boots, grit stinging her eyes. She squeezed the trigger only when necessity burned hot in her veins. Beside her, Nantan moved with fluid precision, a shadow weaving between shots, striking with practiced grace that demanded respect. He was instinct incarnate, the fierce protector this land needed despite the cost. His presence kindled a flame of hope, even as the world seemed draped in ash. But victory was not without sacrifice. A sharp cry tore through the fray, one of their few allies crumpling against the fence, blood seeping into the cracked soil. Clara's breath caught in a strangled gasp, eyes sharp with alarm and grief. The farm, she knew too well now, was a battleground, a fragile sanctuary besieged by fury and fear. Amid the battle's tides, Clara witnessed a patchwork of unlikely comrades, young Apache warriors standing shoulder to shoulder with colonists, faces stoic, fatigue and fear veiled behind determined eyes. They fought not just for land or survival, but for a fragile beacon of unity, a flicker against the gathering darkness. The attackers, sensing resolve, but unwilling to suffer further wounds, pulled back beneath clouds of whipping dust and splintered earth, voices grumbling with reluctant retreat. The fight paused, a hush wrapping the farm like a fragile shroud. Clara knelt among the wounded, hands swift though shaking, steadying the injured with rough urgency. Nantan sank beside her, sweat and dust streaking his face, the slash of blood staining his side a brutal reminder of the price paid for hope. He whispered with quiet wonder, "She is stronger than I feared." Recognition and gratitude flashed between them, before distant thunder rolled faintly across the land. The sound of hooves, mounting fast on the dry earth. Shadows cut across the horizon, figures surging closer with grim intent, far too many for another simple skirmish. Nantan's jaw tightened, despite the pain twisting his features. "I must ride," he said, voice rigid with resolve. "These wounds are not just flesh deep. They carry a message. The time has come to face the council." Clara's gaze lingered on him, heart clenched tight beneath the weight of fear and determination. Legs pressed into the unyielding earth, hands curled around the cold promise of the ring. With the farm surrounded, we have no choice but to stand. The riders thundered nearer, closing a tightening circle, a noose woven with vengeance and desperation. Iron and dust thickened the air, but Clara met Nantan's wounded, fierce gaze with one last spark of defiance before he turned away, riding into the storm that awaited. The farm stood strong but fragile, a beacon under siege, and the enemy closed in, silent as the night. The siege had begun. The morning air hung heavy with tension as Clara tightened her grip on the worn wedding band beneath her blouse. The promise carried in that cold circle had blossomed into a fragile bond, yet the world around them had twisted it into a weapon pointed at their backs. Nantan's steady gaze met hers across the scant dawn light, a silent understanding passing between them. Very little remained the same. "This alliance," Nantan said quietly, voice threaded with unshed pain, "is more than just a pact between us. It is a wound to some, a flame to others." His eyes darkened with the weight of unspoken threats. "Within my own tribe, old grievances fester. The council is restless. Radicals stir. My position grows precarious." Clara swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "Your people, they fear what this represents," she whispered. "And the settlers, their distrust hardens every day. Samuel fans their flames with lies and anger." Nantan's jaw tightened. "I know. Words of treachery and fire stir in the wind. Some call me traitor. Others say I've lost my way. But my heart remains here, between these divided lands, beating for a future that can still be." The day stretched onwards as the farm became a crucible for their delicate alliance. Clara's every step was shadowed by suspicion, her neighbors' gazes sharp knives, slicing through the thin veil of normalcy she tried to weave. Nantan patrolled the fence line with careful vigilance, his presence both shield and provocation. Each encounter, every whispered rumor, was a test, one they could not afford to fail. That evening, word reached the gathering settlers. A meeting was called. Voices, low and heavy, echoed in the dusk like a gathering storm. "The union of Clara and the Apache is a threat to all we stand for," one man said bitterly. "We must not let weakness divide us." Clara's heart clenched at the accusations carried in harsh tones. She stood silent among the crowd, feeling the weight of their hostility press against her like an approaching thundercloud. Nantan's hand brushed against hers, a quiet reassurance amidst the growing unrest. "We hold on too tightly to old fears," he murmured. "But trust is the thing, seed of change, even when the soil is rocky." Later, beneath the cold gaze of stars, they stood together beyond the cabin's walls. The farm had become a battleground, not only of fists and weapons, but of trust and fear. Shadows gathered beyond the fences. Distant fires flared, a silent warning that the calm was but a mask. "They come for us," Clara whispered, voice barely audible over the wind. "Samuel rallies men ready for war." Nantan's hand found hers, fingers tight with resolve. "Then we must stand ready, for peace requires more than hope. It demands courage." The night deepened, almost unbearably still, except for the faint murmurs of restless flames. Movements flickered at the edges of their vision. Young Apache warriors, standing vigil alongside wary settlers, a coalition forged in desperation and belief. Yet beneath the fragile unity lay a current of tension. Some Apache clans whispered that Nantan's choice was betrayal. Spies among allies questioning loyalties. Within Clara, the knowledge of this internal fracture gnawed sharp, a cruel reminder that enemies came not only from outside. A figure emerged from shadow, an aged messenger, dust clinging to his worn cloak. He carried a sealed note, urgency stitched in every step. Nantan received the scroll with a grim bow of his head, eyes scanning the hastily penned words. "They move fast," he said, the cold steel of resolve hardening his tone. "The council convenes. A journey to face their judgment has begun. Their verdict will seal the fate of this fragile alliance." Clara's breath hitched. "So there is no turning back?" "No," Nantan agreed softly. "Only forward into whatever awaits us." The farm lay silent beneath a sky thick with unspoken fears. The alliance they had nurtured hung by a thread woven from love, hope, and defiance, and now faced a reckoning more perilous than any battle fought with guns and fire. As dawn approached, a restless wind rustled the dry grasses, carrying the weight of an uncertain future and the echo of footsteps closing in. The fragile promise of peace trembled on the edge of a blade, poised for the trial that would define all. The test had only just begun. The morning sun draped its soft golden light over the renewed farmstead, casting long, warm shadows that stretched lazily across the land. Clara and Nantan now both claimed as their own. The struggle was over, at least for now, but the scars left behind ran deep, etched into the soil and into the hearts of all who had fought for this fragile peace. Clara stirred awake to the gentle hum of the waking world. Children's laughter drifting from the shade of distant cottonwoods, mingling with the soft murmur of voices, in a language that was no longer foreign, but familiar. Her eyes fluttered open to the sight of Nantan, seated quietly nearby, the wedding band glinting faintly where it rested on her slender finger. The symbol of their unlikely union shone with the promise of hope survived. As she sat up, her body still aching from the wound suffered in defense of their dream, Nantan reached out, his rough, calloused fingers curling tenderly around hers. "You are alive," he whispered, relief seeping through the quiet strength in his voice. "Your fight was not in vain." "I am," Clara replied, voice soft but steady. "Because we stood, because you stood, with me." Their eyes met, a bond forged in fire and hardship, reflecting there with an unspoken oath, sealed beyond any ring. That dawn marked more than survival. It was the dawn of a new era. News had traveled fast. The council, long divided by fear and the stubborn weight of old grudges, convened with the undeniable truth laid bare by Nantan's courage and Clara's unwavering spirit. The elders who had once branded the union a betrayal saw now, clearer than ever, the strength carved by sacrifice and hope. In the great hall of the tribe, where whispered threats once filled the air, a new voice rose, Nantan's, steady and fierce. His words carried the weight of past wounds and the hope of future peace. "We have paid dearly for the chance to walk this path together," he told the gathered elders, his eyes holding the memory of every scar. "But our people's survival depends not on silencing one another, but on listening, on yielding the fires of hatred to grow the seeds of understanding." The council members, somber and reflective, felt the echo of truth settling in their bones. The old certainties were breaking beneath them, replaced by a dawning recognition that unity, though uncertain and thorned, was the only path forward. Back at the farm, Clara and Nantan stood side by side, watching, as the land slowly breathed life back into itself. Once barren fields now welcomed a golden patches of sprouting grain. And in the distance, children, both Apache and settler, ran and played without fear, unburdened by old hatreds. Clara's gaze lingered on the horizon, where the sun met the rolling hills, the familiar ring warming her finger like the promise of that sunrise. "It is more than just land that is healing," she said quietly, her voice threaded with wonder. "It is us, all of us." Nantan nodded, his strong hand finding hers, fingers entwining as naturally as the merging of their two worlds. "We carry the past with us, but we do not have to be chained by it." Around them, the small community they had nurtured began to gather. Settlers who had once looked upon them with suspicion now stood as allies. Apache warriors who had risked exile to defend this fragile dream walked open, proud. The farm was no longer just Clara's sanctuary. Now it was a beacon, a symbol that hope, even when traded for grain and tempered by blood, could blossom into something enduring. Their story, born in the arid dust of hardship, forged through fire and sacrifice, had become legend. As the sun dipped low, a warm amber glow painted the sky. Clara slipped the wedding band onto her left hand once more, the metal cool and steady against skin weary yet unbroken. Nantan's voice, low and steady, broke the silence. "We stand not just for ourselves anymore," he said, eyes gleaming with quiet conviction, "but for those who will come after, children who deserve a land not torn apart by fear." Hand in hand, they walked toward the horizon, toward the future they had fought so fiercely to claim. Behind them, laughter echoed, blending the languages and hopes of two worlds becoming one. In this moment, the past and the present folded into a single breath, held and released in a vow of peace. The feared Apache rider and the determined widow had reshaped destiny itself, healing a fractured land through the power of their union. The farm thrived, their community united, standing resilient as the sun set on a frontier once divided, now a place where children of all nations laughed beneath a sky no longer clouded by suspicion. And in that quiet strength, the promise endured.